Thanks for listening to Wait For It. Before we start the show today, I wanted to ask for a favor that shouldn't take too much of your time. If you're enjoying the show, please rate it 5 stars on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and leave us a good review as well. This helps new listeners find the show and helps us to grow the audience. We appreciate you so much. So many of you have reached out and shared how the show has resonated with you, and I've really enjoyed hearing from you. With that in mind, we're planning to do a mailbag episode, which is where we respond to some of your questions and stories in an actual episode. So if you have a question or want to share some of your experiences with Wait, please email us at wait@ohitsbigron.com. Again, that's WEIGHT@OHITSBIGRON.com. That email is also in the show notes. And with that, let's start the show. Wait For It is a show about the way we feel about our bodies. Consequently, each episode may include references to gaining and losing weight, eating disorders, weight loss surgery, and weight stigma. If these topics are triggering to you, please take care while listening. We have links to support resources for anyone who may need them in our show notes. Wait for it. When I was a lot younger, I always imagined what I would look like as an adult. Whether in my personal life or on television and in movies, I always saw black folks that just looked good, wearing the right hat, the right suit, the right shirt, the right shoes. Everything was in place. I wanted to be one of those folks. They were setting the standard for what looking good was. As a child and teenager, not always controlling my clothing budget, I didn't always get a say in what I was wearing. But I always imagined I would become an adult, have my own money, and then I'd be in charge with unlimited clothing possibilities. When I got fat, it felt like those options immediately became limited. It felt difficult, if not impossible, to walk into a store and find even the most basic of clothes. And it turns out I wasn't alone. So in the fall of 2022 in Washington, D.C., I attended a clothing swap, which is exactly what it sounds like. A bunch of people come together with their clothes, lay them out on the table, and then they just start picking up whatever they want. The idea of a clothing swap isn't exactly new or novel, but this clothing swap is very specific. It was organized by a plus-size meetup group called Plush DMV, which is headed up by a friend of mine who you probably remember from episode 1, Mayra Mejia.
I talk with my hands. Okay. I'm Mayra Mejia. I am a freelance writer and editor. There isn't really many inclusive clothing swaps in the city. There are lots of clothing swaps, but very few plus-size options. So I wanted to have an exclusively plus-size swap so that people feel welcome and included.
Nearly everyone who showed up was plus-sized looking for plus-size clothing. But this is a temporary solution. It doesn't solve for the larger problem of regularly looking for clothes and often coming up empty. And as a fat person, finding the clothes is only half the battle.
We end up having to pay more money to get it shipped to us because there's such size discrepancy between brands.
We can hardly ever try things on.
You can't shop in store. And I don't like having to order a ton of stuff online and then send it all back, but that's what I end up doing.
Clothes that are supposedly my size just don't fit.
I find that most brands that expand their size range, they don't necessarily think about the tall plus size folks. So very often things are too short still.
And ultimately, most of the things we find in stores aren't fashionable.
One of my biggest frustrations is a store that carries trendy things for the straight sizes, and when you go to plus sizes, it's a completely different style. It's almost like they thought we wanted something completely different than everyone else. So I think that is really, it can be frustrating.
As a guy, finding fashionable clothing that isn't limited in color or style is already tough. As a fat guy, even finding something as simple as a t-shirt that's both stylish and in my size is virtually impossible. But I will say, when it comes to fashion trends, The women are dealing with something I thankfully have never seen in men's fashion.
I also really hate the cutouts on the shoulders.
In my brief and very unscientific survey of women at the swap, this was by far the #1 most hated plus-sized women's wear trend. The cutouts or holes on the shoulders, the so-called cold shoulder.
You mean like the cold shoulder?
Cold shoulder.
Cold shoulder.
I would like a full shirt.
Please stop cutting parts of my clothing out.
I wonder if Donna Karen knows what she hath wrought. She's the creator of the cold shoulder.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's Donna.
That I didn't know. So I am going to get into the cold shoulder because the truth is, I feel like I came to this story with a very naive, why can't we just all have the same thing? And I pulled a thread.
For this episode, I needed some help.
Can we do introductions?
Yeah. I'm Sarah Dealy. I'm a fat person who really likes clothes.
And you also make Wait For It.
I'm the editor of Wait For It.
You gotta plug the podcast. And I'm Avery Trufelman, host of Articles of Interest, a show about clothes.
And I'm Ronald Young Jr., host of this show, Wait For It. And after narrowing down all of the issues I and others have experienced finding plus-size clothes, I reached out to Avery with one question. Why is it so hard to make clothes that are inclusive of fat folks that are fashionable and affordable?
I have an answer. Okay. I found the answer.
I found some answers, I think, too.
Okay.
So why does plus-size fashion get the cold shoulder? Well, today, Avery, Sarah, and I are going to try on some answers. This is Articles of Wait. Waiting.
Articles.
Waiting. Wait for it.
Articles of Interest.
Wait for it. Articles. Wait for it.
Articles.
The wait, the wait, the wait, the wait.
Articles of Interest.
Wait for it.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive. Are you driving your car or doing laundry right now? Podcasts go best when they're bundled with another activity. Like Progressive home and auto policies, they're best when they're bundled too. Having these two policies together makes insurance easier and could help you save. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. Quote a home and car bundle today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
I want to tell you about a new show from Radiotopia Presents that we're really excited about. It's called Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. Host Jess Shane puts out an open call on Craigslist for aspiring documentary subjects and selects 4 to work with. Together, they pull back the curtain on what really goes on behind the scenes of your favorite nonfiction shows, showing what it takes and what it costs to collect, edit, and consume stories about people's real lives. Radiotopia presents Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative, out now on your preferred podcast platform. Wait for it.
I'm just starting, but you know the deal.
Are we already recording?
Yeah.
Oh.
We gotta have the mise en scene.
Yeah.
We gotta.
Yeah.
So after sliding into Avery's DMs on Twitter with my clothing-related questions and having a few Zoom meetings, Avery, Sarah, and I did some research about the plus-sized fashion industry. Earlier this year, we all gathered in Avery's apartment in person to talk about what we found. As we got started, Sarah and I warned Avery that she was probably going to receive some feedback on this episode.
Avery, whenever this comes out, you will get emails from people that are when you do a show about fat people and about fat people getting any basic human right clothing. I did a piece for Death, Sex, and Money about love, about fat people being loved. And you will get emails from people who just really need to let you know that being fat is unhealthy. So why are you doing this episode?
That's awful. What do you say to that?
You just ignore it.
That's right. It's it is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing about being fat that's so like we're fighting to even be treated like humans.
I don't know. It leads to a larger existential thing. It's like, what, you want people to like go away? Like, what? I don't understand. Yeah, I just don't know what to tell people if people say like, why should people be clothed?
I think the way we dress is so important to what spaces we're allowed to access, right? If you're fat, you can't like last minute go somewhere ever.
I've had that experience, walk into a suit store. That's 100% accurate.
Yeah, like you're on a promising date and they're like, want to go to a wedding next weekend? Like, maybe not. Or say you have like a job interview. That is also like, you could drive to the suburbs and go to Lane Bryant and get a power suit. Like, whether or not these things are actually prohibiting people from doing activities, which I'm pretty confident that they are, there's just this messaging that is like, where are fat people allowed? And I think we do that through clothes.
Sarah was articulating this in a way that I hadn't thought of before. The idea of access to spaces through clothing. Obviously, it's true, though. You heard me mention the suit store. For many years, I was a regular church-going person. And at my church, we dress up to attend. But not being able to fit my dress suits anymore is partially the reason why I stopped attending church. And most clothing brands will say there are practical reasons for all the problems we're mentioning, whether it's the lack of sizes or the lack of clothing on current trends. For the longest time, I assumed that it was about capitalism and greed, but I would soon learn there's more to the story. I'll let Avery take it from here.
The line that brands usually give as to why there are not more plus sizes is something to the effect of like, there's not enough demand. It's a minority of people who are over a certain size. But that is obviously bullshit. And I talked to someone who revealed all this.
A size 0 is not that common.
Yeah.
Maybe a size 40 isn't that common either, but they exist. But there are very, very few clothes for a size 40 and quite a lot for a size 0.
And so it's obviously not about like demand. And then ultimately the logic a brand gives is like, the reason we don't have size 40 is it's too complicated and difficult. They say it's too hard to make.
The too hard part is usually referring to the pattern making.
Pattern making.
So a pattern is an integral part of making clothing.
I talk to a lot of people in fashion. Pattern makers are the best people in fashion. And so you should know that Leila Kelleher absolutely rules.
My name's Leila Kelleher, and I'm a plus-size pattern maker and sewist. I identify as fat, so I would say that I'm a fat pattern maker.
So pattern makers, how do I put this? Pattern makers in fashion, they're sort of like architects.
So a pattern is essentially like a blueprint for making clothing. So if you think about clothes, we have to make a 2-dimensional piece of fabric into something that fits a 3-dimensional body.
So the pattern maker is basically doing translation work. Like a designer will come up with a sketch, an image, and then the pattern maker uses basically math. They like use geometry to look at the drawing and be like, how do we render this in 3 dimensions?
And we learn kind of rules of thumb, how to follow procedures in order to get a certain result. Extend this much, draw this line this long, the shoulder point is this much higher, like the high shoulder point is this much higher than the low shoulder point. Things like that.
But here's the thing. A lot of these rules of thumb just don't apply to plus sizes.
The rules for drafting basic patterns for straight sizes do not work for plus sizes. They just don't work.
But I'm not saying the brands are right. It's not too complicated. It's just different. Like, it's just a different thing. Because let me tell you how straight sizes are made.
So the procedure of creating different sizes from a base size is called grading.
And so let's say we're making a pair of pants, right? Like, we're a company making a pair of pants. We would start with a pair of pants in one size.
You would start with a sample size, a size 6 or a size 8.
That is the one size that they try out on an actual human. Like, my friend in Oakland was actually the Levi's size 8, and she would go in and like try on size 8 pants, and they would adjust and be like, oh, is there give here? Is there bend here? Okay. They fit it to that quote unquote medium size, which is again a size 6 or an 8. And then once they get those dimensions right, they use those measurements to create all the other sizes. Like none of the other sizes actually get fitted on an actual human.
And then you can make it smaller and bigger through a series of kind of mathematical functions, right?
So yeah, they're basically almost using it like a recipe. They're just like mathematically increasing or decreasing to make bigger or smaller sizes. So it's called grading it down to make it smaller or grading it up to make it larger.
So, but that doesn't really account for genetic dimensions of humans and like how my thigh might be longer than yours or like be thicker around or any of that stuff. So how does that, if only the size 8 is the person that, or the fit model is the only one that gets the perfect clothes, how does this work for everyone else?
Well, funny you should ask. I mean, it's part of why most of our clothes just don't fucking fit. I mean, no, really. They don't fit. Like most of our clothes stretch or are oversized. Like no matter what size you are, our clothes just don't fit.
Yeah.
When you grade the size up, it doesn't all work mathematically because it's not like all parts of the body grow at the same rate.
When someone gets fatter, their soft tissue gets bigger, but it doesn't get bigger in all dimensions equally.
So like the bicep will grow larger than the forearm. You know, you can't just like grow the whole arm.
Certain parts of the garment get bigger at different rates than other parts. So what can end up is if you start at a size 8 and then make it into a size 20, you see very huge necklines, extremely long arms, very, very wide shoulders, pockets that are like near the waistline, just unusual things.
So a brand would hear all of this and be like, it's too hard. Like there are all these considerations to do, but it's really not that hard. I mean, for one, you just add another fit model.
A second sample size needs to be created that is more appropriate for a plus size body. So oftentimes that's an 18 in the industry. Personally, I'd like to see it a little bit larger.
Hiring another fit model or another 2 fit models, it's not that hard. The thing that is actually difficult that the fashion industry probably will never say, getting pattern makers to realize that it's not that hard.
Because it's a body that we might not be familiar with making patterns for, and certainly patterns can be different shapes and they can have different dimensions, it can be unfamiliar.
So basically you just can't plug and play. You can't just like use the toolkit that you have. You have to actually be a lot more hands-on with plus size clothes. The problem is it really goes back to fashion school, really, and like what fashion designers are taught, because there's this vicious self-perpetuating cycle where most of the people who go to fashion school because they love clothes are thin.
Teenagers, fat teenagers and plus size teenagers don't really have the opportunity to participate in fashion. And so it's very hard for them to feel like they could be fashion designers or they could go to fashion school if they don't have access to fashionable clothing, the tween experience of plus size as wearing like business casual to middle school, because people shop at Lane Bryant and it's terrible.
This is the sad joke about plus size clothes for teens. I heard this from folks at the clothing swap and from Sarah as well.
You had to dress up like the school librarian or whatever as like a 13-year-old in like business suits.
So for me, I was a fat kid. I did do a little bit of a business casual look sometimes.
How you say it like you have complete autonomy as a child.
As kids, they can't wear clothes made for kids. Those clothes don't fit. They don't look flattering on them. And the clothes that are flattering on them are made for adults going to work in an office. I imagine that these kids don't exactly grow up loving fashion. So it's a self-perpetuating cycle where thin kids grow up loving fashion and go to fashion school. There, they're taught to make clothes for other thin people.
We were taught that everything should flatter, which is a bit of a dirty word because it's really coded language for make someone look thinner than they are.
You're so right. I never thought of that. That is what you're taught in fashion school, that everything has to be flattering and you have to, like, that's what consumers want and you have to design it in the most flattering way possible. And then the other part of it is that, like, plus size consumers are used to having nothing or nothing that fits, so they don't expect good fit.
And I think that fat and plus size consumers have a hard time expressing what's going on, because they're pretty grateful for getting anything because they've been so conditioned into table scraps, really.
Yeah.
And so, you don't want to complain too much or they might stop making your size, and that would be even worse.
And this happens all the time. It happens all the time. It happens on a dime.
We've seen it a few times, actually, where companies have expanded their size ranges and then it's failed. And that's very, very frustrating.
Like Ann Taylor Loft did a plus size line for a short time. And then, do you remember this? This was so recently, the Old Navy thing?
Yeah.
It was in 2021.
Ann Taylor Loft got cancelled. Old Navy has significantly dialed it back after, I think, just a quarter.
And so then companies are like, well, we tried making plus size clothes. You said people wanted to buy our clothes, but then they didn't buy our clothes. It wasn't worth it.
But if a company hasn't ever had plus sizes before and they suddenly start having plus sizes, why would anyone follow that company on social media? They might not even know that they have plus sizes. And so it takes a lot of work. It's not just a question of having them.
Sometimes, very often, Leila says if a company expands their sizing, they won't even show plus size models. You just have to know somehow that they have it. And then people don't trust the sizes. I don't have to tell you guys this. It's a long-term buildup of trust.
Yeah. And most people are fat. In America, 68% of women are a size 14 and above.
Yeah, it really does prove that people would rather lose out on money than have fat people wear their clothes.
People hate fat people more than they love money.
So we have part of our answer when it comes to inclusivity in making plus size clothing. Pattern makers aren't taught plus size pattern making, so they think it's harder than it is. And then the brands that hire those pattern makers don't put in the time and effort to truly let size expansion take off. It's created this strict divide between what is plus size fashion and what is quote unquote normal fashion. And this strange culture around plus size pattern making, as Sarah found, might explain the cold shoulder.
I pulled a thread, and the thread was that I was looking up plus size trends, and I found this quote from a blog called Can We Talk? Designing for Plus Size Bodies is Different, from thehuntswoman.com. And it said, a fun factoid about design for plus sizes is the ubiquitous cold shoulder. This is an easy trick for designers/manufacturers because the hole allows for different sizes of upper arms.
It could be that the cold shoulder is a cheat code for pattern makers.
Just put in the cheat code and then get to the stuff that's more important. That felt dark to me. And so I wanted to pull on that thread. And I did.
But it's even darker than Sarah or Avery or I imagined. After the break, the unsettling history of where Lane Bryant comes from. Hello, Wait For It listeners. I hope you're enjoying the show. And I want to invite you to check out another Oh It's Big Ron Studio show called Leaving the Theater. Leaving the Theater is a television and film review podcast that started with me reviewing movies as I walked out of the theater immediately after seeing them. It's now expanded to include me reviewing television and streaming titles on my couch as well. These are the freshest take on what we just watched, and it's a lot of fun. On each episode, I talk with my movie-loving friends or colleagues from other podcasts, and we rate whatever we watched from 1 to 5 stars. If you're an overthinker like me, you'll enjoy agreeing and disagreeing with my analysis. Again, that's Leaving the Theater, available everywhere you listen to podcasts. Wait for it.
I think Business Casual Child is the perfect way to set up Lane Bryant. It is for more mature women. It's a huge proponent of the cold shoulder. All the shoulders are cold in there. It's very staid and power suit. I'm a lady and I'm going to a job interview for a position in HR. That's Lane Bryant. And something that I learned is that before Business Casual Child, before the cold shoulder, Lane Bryant was actually the first plus size store ever.
Lane Bryant actually began as a maternity wear business, like a bricks and mortar maternity wear business.
So I talked to a woman named Lauren Downing-Peters, who is a fashion historian at Columbia College Chicago, and she focuses on plus size clothing. And like she's like one of very few people who study this.
The Lane Bryant brand was founded by a Lithuanian Jewish immigrant woman named Lena Himmelstein Bryant.
Lena Himmelstein Bryant, she went to go get a bank loan one day, and they accidentally Americanized her name to Lane Bryant, and that became the name of her store.
Lena Bryant sounds so much better.
Yeah, I want to stop at Lena Himmelstein's.
Yeah, but it started as a maternity wear company. And she was just like this really good seamstress who made the first mass market maternity gown that was sort of like a little shift dress that had an adjustable waist strap. So you could like change it for how pregnant you were. This was like the first time really in recent history that pregnant people were like leaving their houses, and they were having like huge families. So they would use these dresses all the time. She became really well known. And in 1909, her husband died, and she remarried a man named Albert Nelson. He was a mechanical engineer, and he was a businessman.
And he saw what she was doing with her maternity dresses and realized that there might be a bigger business opportunity there.
And this is really the birth of the American plus size industry. Albert was like an industrialist, and he like shared this belief with a lot of other American fashion industrialists that fashion design was like for the girls. It's low skilled, it's feminine, it's not scientific. So he's like, I'm a scientist. Fat people are a problem. We know that. And all around him, this market is opening up, starting to like try to solve the problem of fat.
And he becomes very preoccupied with how stout wear can be used to actually make fat bodies appear more slender. They were drawing upon theories of optical illusion that were drawn from Gestalt psychology, arguing that, you could make a fat body appear more slender by like putting vertical lines on the dress rather than horizontal lines.
Wow, horizontal stripes. That is like been in, I feel like I read about don't wear horizontal stripes in style in like 2010.
Yeah, that all goes back to the early 20th century. And in the early 20th century, camouflage was also invented. And so they were talking a lot about like the powers of this new technology, camouflage, about how it could be like taken from battleships and applied to fat bodies to make fat bodies appear smaller.
To him, fat women were like these unseemly things that he could minimize with stripes and hide with camouflage and like disappear with a trick of the light. And obviously, plus size clothing is not the only place where you find like ideas like this. Like you were just talking about how fashion school, they're all taught to, make flattering things. But I just think the difference of that is like, it's not meant to accentuate your best parts and hide your other parts. It's meant to hide and obscure you completely. I mean, it's like, this is why when I want to go dress my body and my goal is to like express myself and like show who I am and how I've changed. For Albert, a body like mine wasn't something to dress. It was something to fix.
Wait, can I ask, was Lena plus size?
No.
Whoa!
Get out!
Yeah.
No, Lena was thin.
Yo!
They were both.
Yo!
That's the thing. This dark history is what I'm talking about. This is a thin woman.
But isn't some credit due to Lane Bryant?
Oh, I mean, like, sure. Lane Bryant has a function and it served it. And I think it is still alive, a long life beyond Albert.
Lane Bryant has improved considerably from what it was when it first launched. it has certainly outgrown Albert Nelson's vision of creating clothes to hide fat bodies, and today carries more than just business casual plus-size clothes. But in a lot of ways, it hasn't grown beyond the heyday of plus-size women clothes in the 1980s. And by then, there was a new game in town, an unusual competitor to Lane Bryant. I'll let Avery take it from here.
Okay, so we were talking about Lane Bryant and like business casual clothes and how there's not a huge range of expression in plus sizes. In the 80s, this definitely changes.
The store sold all kinds of like wild kind of looks that I think were meant to show like I'm here and I'm unapologetically taking up space.
This is Natalia Mehlman-Petrzela, the author of Fit Nation, The Gains and Pains of America's Exercise Obsession.
I'm a historian of American politics and culture.
I wanted to talk to her about this one very special boutique that started in the late 70s into the 80s. And they sold these like glamorous, sumptuous, plus size clothes.
Like a blazer with like a scarf like half over the blazer, you know what I mean? Like just these like very power late 80s outfits.
That's Marissa Meltzer. She writes a lot for the New York Times, and she has a column there called Shop Monster. And she has also written about this very special plus size boutique in the 80s, and it was called
The Forgotten Women.
The Forgotten Woman.
Which is an amazing name.
I mean, is it an amazing name or is it an insulting name?
I mean, both of those things. I think it's kind of an amazing name to name your really expensive plus-size clothing boutique, The Forgotten Woman.
The Forgotten Woman was genuinely so high-end. Like, this was not Lane Bryant.
I mean, some of the things that they were selling were like $600, $1,800 in like the 80s. So that's a huge amount of money. Brands like Marni, Prada, definitely Dolce & Gabbana, Michael Kors have long made plus-size clothes. A lot of stores didn't necessarily carry them.
It just took someone really headstrong to go to these designers and convince them to sell their clothes at retail.
She did go to designers saying like, no, you need to make clothes. I will sell them and I can sell them.
The force behind The Forgotten Woman was Nancy Radman.
I do want to resist calling her a forgotten woman. It's too on the nose.
But here's the thing that sort of relates back to what the pattern maker Leila was talking about, which is that Nancy Radman got into fashion because she wasn't always plus size.
She hadn't grown up a fat woman.
And over the course of 2 pregnancies, Nancy put on weight, and then she never went back.
And in many ways, she had kind of bucked the conventional advice to women in that period who were going through that, which was like, well, you better lose weight and you better get skinny. And that is the only way that you deserve to spend money on yourself and to look pretty. And she said no.
And The Forgotten Woman is a destination, like a true shopping destination, situated among all the other fancy shopping destinations.
She starts with a shop on the Upper East Side of Manhattan,
where women of a certain size and income bracket could try on clothes and lounge around.
There's one on Rodeo Drive, and like Roseanne Barr shop there, and Oprah Winfrey.
So all the big stars are there with their husbands and their boyfriends.
We would be remiss if we didn't mention the Sugar Daddy Bar.
It was called the Sugar Daddy Bar, which is amazing. It was literally a bar. You know, like there's like the boyfriend chair. They had a full-on bar where you could drink and eat.
The sugar daddy thing, I think, is really on the nose because it's also saying not only do these fat women have the ability to look beautiful and wear these clothes and buy them, but they're desirable to men who want to shower them with gifts and love and money. And so these guys are going to wait around while their beautiful object of desire shops and they pay for it. As I am saying that, that's obviously such a retrograde fantasy.
So her ideas are kind of old-timey, especially when you consider the fact that Nancy Radman started The Forgotten Woman in 1977. This was like during the throes of the radical women's liberation movement.
In that moment, even a moment that we think of as characterized by like feminist activism, like it was still, fatness was still seen as like such a pathology.
Even for the radical feminists, they drew the line at fatness. Yeah. Like they wouldn't go there.
Sitting before me is a copy, I think an original copy of Fat is a Feminist Issue by Susie Orbach.
So Natalia showed me a few parts of this book, Fat is a Feminist Issue, which came out in 1978. That's the year after The Forgotten Woman was launched by Nancy Radman. And when you start reading Fat is a Feminist Issue, you're like, oh, right on. They're like talking about the patriarchy and they're talking about unrealistic beauty standards. And you're like, okay, great. And then until you get to the twist.
And what she actually arrives at is the idea that like fatness is a problem, but until you sort of claim your feminist sensibility, you won't be able to lose the weight.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So Fat is a Feminist Issue ends up basically being a diet book. And when you contrast it with that, like Nancy's form of liberation is obviously quite girl bossy, like women deserve to spend their money and feel good. But that is something that even radical circles could like barely accept.
And so I think that Nancy Radman, as much as she's like an unapologetic capitalist who's sort of bound up in some pretty conventional ideas about femininity and romance and all the rest, I think it's a huge deal what she does. Like she's saying, no, it's not a problem. You're not fat because you have a pathology. You're fat and like come buy a pretty dress and feel good about it.
And people felt really good about it.
The biggest testimony to her impact is the fact that The Forgotten Woman became a mall store.
So it leaves all those like fancy exclusive shopping districts and goes everywhere.
Oh, this became a chain. I remember those stores.
But I don't.
Yeah, well, the store had about like a 10-ish year heyday.
In the 90s, The Forgotten Woman was sold to venture capitalists.
And then filed for Chapter 11 sometime after that.
So one version of the story ending is like financial mismanagement, you know, just like ended in the way a lot of businesses end.
But I also think that like the woman was not so forgotten by the late 1990s. The Forgotten Woman sold a lot of other brands, and that becomes kind of proof of concept, right? So once Forgotten Woman shows that there's this marketplace, then other places can follow suit. You would see that a lot more stores actually were carrying larger sizes.
So you didn't necessarily have to go to this expensive and specialized boutique, but that you could go where everyone else in your family was shopping and go to the plus size departments, which were usually like in the basement next to like a bathroom, and like you had to ask 3 people how to get there.
And so for a long time, it was really about like, okay, can I just get access to the basic clothes that everybody else has so that you don't have to be that teenager shopping at Lane Bryant?
I just want a turtleneck, like a ribbed gray turtleneck that looks like my friend's ribbed gray turtleneck. And more, you could get those things.
And that era of like just wanting basics just to fit in, Marissa says is sort of ending.
I don't want the only options to be that I have to be kind of minimal or plain or in good taste. And I think where we are now is people are not as into like assimilation and want to stand out and want like special clothing.
And this all goes back to everything that we've been talking about, is that like so much of this is about larger culture and acceptance of the idea that like plus size people can and should invest in nice, beautiful clothes.
The idea of being plus size is that it's a layover. Like this is not your final body shape or type or size. So like why would you invest in clothes for that time in your life or whatever, even if that's the only size that you've been?
Yeah, the clothes from The Forgotten Woman would probably be amazing. Everyone at the clothing swap would have loved them.
I think our clothes would fit in well now.
But like, where are they? Where did the clothes from The Forgotten Woman go? Where are the vintage plus-sized clothes? The go-to answer is that plus sizes simply did not exist in the past. I'll let Sarah take it from here.
So I guess, yeah, did fat people exist before 2003? That's the best question I've ever had. Yes, I existed before 2003.
So this is me and Jessica Hinkle. Jessica owns Proud Mary Vintage, which is in Highland Park, LA, and it is specifically a plus-size vintage store.
It's the opposite of like when you walk in a store and you're like, where's the plus size section? And they're like, it's that dark corner. Like, I want this to be fun and not like a necessity. Like, I don't want this to be like, I need a t-shirt that fits. Let me go to the mall. I want this to be like, I want to go to a store and have fun.
It does feel like Proud Mary has some of the clothes from The Forgotten Woman. She has so much 80s and 90s. There are so many sequins in there. When I was there, I bought a fully beaded black dress with sparkly moons and stars all over it. Jessica walked me through a lot of the theories on why there isn't much plus-size vintage. And one of them is that vintage measurements are just really custom and kind of strange.
When I find older clothing, like true vintage, it's custom made to somebody's measurements. So it's not like you can go put on a Lycra dress and it's a 2X, but if you're a 4X, it might work, right? This is specifically to somebody's body measurement. So it might be fit you in the waist, but it doesn't fit you in the bust.
And also, straight size people buy up a lot of the plus size vintage and alter it to fit them. But I think it has a lot to do with like that idea that Nancy Radman was fighting against. The idea that fatness is this temporary state. I think people just haven't made as nice clothes for fat people historically. And Jessica is fighting against that too. The clothes at Proud Mary are beautiful and high quality. They're loud, like glittery pink dress loud, like this one that I tried on.
Like, I feel like you could be a country star.
Absolutely.
With some boots and some big hair, and it'd be perfect.
What I really like about all this stuff is it is sort of the opposite of that, what you were talking about with like not wanting to be seen.
Yeah.
Wanting to be small.
I mean, that's kind of the vibe of this whole store.
And Proud Mary is a whole community. People hang out in there. Jessica hosts events. And it's not the only plus-size vintage store in LA. It's not even the only one in the neighborhood.
Hello. Welcome to the Plus Bus.
All right, can I get a tour?
Is this the first time you've ever come here?
It's actually not.
Okay, so you know a little bit about it. But...
Yeah, I bought a dress here. So this is me and Jen and Marcy, who own the Plus Bus, which is also in Highland Park, Los Angeles. They are a mile away from each other.
Do they have cold shoulders at the Plus Bus?
So, no.
Explicitly not.
Explicitly not. They were like, we don't let that into the store.
We don't have room to keep the baddies around. Like anything with a cold shoulder, anything with a banded bottom, don't even come at me. Bro, I don't want that. And I don't want anyone to dress like that. That's the thing, is like, I don't want people coming in here and having to pick from the same garbage that they pick from everywhere else. I want them to come in here and be like, holy crap, this is a showroom of brands I never even knew existed.
Oh my God, it really is like the Forgotten Woman.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
So Jen has a design background.
I designed for almost every contemporary brand there is in Los Angeles, and I designed for a catalog that does plus size and straight sizes.
So, I had to ask about the cold shoulder.
They would, in fittings, cut cold shoulders out of the sleeves because the fabric was non-stretch, and it gave more options in fitting, is what they would call it. Is basically like, if we cut this part out, then we don't have to measure shoulders.
So it was right.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least somebody has done that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Does that seem nefarious to you?
I know why it seems nefarious to me. Because it seems like rather than doing the work that it would take, all the stuff that we discussed, like fit models and stuff that you just said was like not more expensive. It was just people don't know how to do it, or they haven't done it, or it's not, they think it's complicated. Rather than doing all that work, they just say, why don't we just do this catch-all that's kind of like, it's a workaround.
Okay, here's why it seems nefarious to me. Because it's thin people or these straight size designers who are designing for fat people, and instead of doing the work, they're like, well, let's make them think this is a trend.
Oh my God. That's way worse. This, you know what this sounds like, honestly? And this is like Wait, not like, do you know that scene in Mean Girls where they try to sabotage Regina George and they do so by cutting out the breast parts of her tank tops, and then next week everyone's wearing the same thing because it's a trend, but it was born out of something that was actually mean-spirited and wrong. This is what it feels like it is for cold shoulders. Like they cut out the shoulders and now everyone's like wearing them and they're like, no, this is actually whack.
Yeah, it feels like a little wink, like we got them, like they fell for it.
They fell for it. And we don't know if this is actually intentional, but the idea of clothing manufacturers using cheat codes for plus-size clothing doesn't feel like too far of a stretch. Fat folks care about what they look like. We're not just trying to wear flattering clothes that make us look smaller. We're trying to look good. We want clothes that fit the bodies we exist in right now. And it brings me some joy when I see that we're willing to fill in the gap ourselves. When I see Mayra's Plush DMV organizing plus-size clothing swaps and learned about places like the Plus Bus, Proud Mary, and the plus-size patterns that Leila Kelleher makes and sells, I know that this idea that we'll be grateful for whatever scraps we're given is being challenged. There's still a lot of work to be done. More brands need to make a concerted effort to create, sell, and market plus-sized clothing. We need more plus-size fit models. We need the fashion industry to be committed to making clothes for all bodies. We shouldn't have to do the work ourselves. But it's good to know that when we have to, we do. Even if listeners send angry emails. Especially if listeners send angry emails.
If you don't get emails.
I feel like we did it wrong if you don't get emails, to be honest.
Really?
Wait For It is a production of Oh It's Big Ron Studios and is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, creator-owned, listener-supported podcasts. Discover audio with vision at radiotopia.fm. This episode was a co-production with Articles of Interest. It was produced and written by Avery Trufelman, Sarah Dealy, and me, Ronald Young Jr. Sound design and mixing from the Reverend John Delore of Starlight Diner. Show and episode art by Heather Wilder. Theme music from Jey Red, with additional music from Ray Royal, Mass Potential, The Artist DT, and the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Special thanks to Mayra Mejia, Molly Goodman, Stacy Toth, Brittany Saunders, Maddie Hughes, Hannah Leonhard, Laura Downing-Peters, Jessica Hinkle, Jen Wilder, Marcy Guevara-Prete, Leila Kelleher, Natalia Mehlman-Petrzela, and Marissa Meltzer. Also, special thanks to Avery Trufelman for hosting us in her apartment, feeding us cookies and bagels, and giving us seltzer water. You can follow me on Twitter, Threads, Instagram, and TikTok at Oh It's Big Ron. That's at OHITSBIGRON. You can find out more about this show and other Oh It's Big Ron Studios shows by following us on Instagram at Oh It's Big Ron Studios and on Twitter at Oh It's Big Ron Stew. That's STEW. And just a quick note, we are going to have a mailbag episode. So if you have a question about the show or if you want to share a story about weight, please shoot us an email at weight@ohitsbigron.com. That's WEIGHT at ohitsbigron.com. Wait For It will be back next week. Thanks for listening. Wait For It. I'm ready to cut some people out.
But I feel like that's the other thing is like, if you're like, why don't you go to the gym? It's like, in what clothes? You know? Like, that's the thing. Like, go eat a salad. Wearing what? Like this is not anathema to that argument.
Yes.
Radiotopia.
From